Good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in again. Tonight I'm going to deal with the child protection policy and procedures, or the child safeguarding and child protection policy and procedures. Again, briefly going over it, pointing out where I see are some important things for people to be aware of in relation to changes in policy. Before I do that, from some of the questions that have come in, some people, a good few people have actually been asking about Zoom and safeguarding and so on. So when you're having Zoom meetings, I suppose the thing is to be aware that the kids aren't there. So there's less of a risk. They're all at home, or they should be all at home. And that's probably something that should be agreed with the parents in the first place. So what you really need is a minimum of 2 scouters, more or less to look after each other. Try for mixed gender, but again, there's not going to be any physical interaction with any of the children, so it's not as much of a priority. So just to ensure better protection, then you turn off private or direct messaging, so whatever questions are asked or whatever, anything that's said goes to everybody. Yeah, that goes to everybody. Children at home, and this is advice for the parents, children who are at home should be in the common room, or a common room like a dining room or kitchen or so on, where the parents can walk in and check on them if they wish, or be in the room with them if they wish when they're participating, but not in a private bedroom where they are seen as private, because that's where an awful lot of abuse happens online, and we just don't want to create that risk. And then when it comes to the use of those common rooms, it's important to remind parents that the microphone is on for everybody in the room and everything can be heard. There have been a couple of instances here and there where parents lost a little bit with the children because they were doing something and everybody else heard it, and parents in other houses heard it, and so on. So just to remind the parents of that, to be careful that microphone is on. Once it's on, another option is to mute everybody except whoever's doing the leading in it. But again, that kind of, I understand that kind of holds back on conversation and interaction as well. So that's a matter to be considered depending on what you're doing. So the safeguarding document that we're talking about today is one of the 4 that I introduced in the first webinar. It's the child safeguarding and child protection policies and procedures. So the code of behaviour and this document really are what form the code of good practice. And the kind of chapters that are in the child safeguarding and child protection policies and procedures are the principles and statement of commitment of Scouting Ireland to protect children, the roles of certain Scouting Ireland personnel, assessing and managing risk, identifying, responding and reporting concerns. That's the main big chapter really in it. How we respond to concerns involving Scouting Ireland personnel. And then there's managing information and confidentiality, which I have been repeating throughout the various webinars. And there's a section on the recruitment and selection of Scouting Ireland personnel and how we provide information. That's a requirement under the Act that we have in our policies, how we provide information. And that will be in the training courses and these webinars and so on. So the principles, very similar to the code of behaviour. We want to promote the safety and well-being of children. It's everybody's responsibility in Scouting Ireland. We want to promote children's rights, including their participation in matters that affect children. It's also a commitment that all Scouting Ireland personnel will understand their roles and responsibilities in relation to safeguarding. That's another purpose of these webinars, along with the training that's ongoing. Again, confidentiality is a major commitment. And I see a few people have expressed reservations in some of the questions and the feedback in relation to confidentiality and having to come straight to safeguarding without discussing the matter with the group leader. It's really important that you talk to safeguarding first and make contact with us. It's in your own interests to get that information to us. We'll discuss it with the group leader if the group leader needs to know. It's a matter of who needs to know. It's important that members trust us and come to us with the information so that we can deal with it properly. Another commitment then is to take appropriate action in relation to concerns or disclosures. And really, we report everything to TUSLA and the Gardaí that involves any type of child welfare concern or anything that even looks like a crime. And to have robust safeguarding arrangements. That's the commitment of Scouting Ireland in relation to its policies. So the roles and responsibilities. The first is the designated liaison person. And essentially there are 3 of those. Well, 1 designated liaison person and 2 deputy DLPs. So I'm the designated liaison person, and the 2 case officers, Jill Lacey and Caroline Healy, are the deputy DLPs in Scouting Ireland. The 3 of us are also mandated persons in relation to the Children First Act, and I'm the relevant person in relation to the Children First Act. So the relevant person is someone who's responsible for the child safeguarding statement and who TUSLA will contact in relation to that. The group leader obviously has roles and responsibilities in relation to ensuring everybody in the group is trained, everybody's vetted and so on. And the provincial support officer also has a role. And there are 2 support resources that people can go to discuss policy and what the policy is, or you can come to the safeguarding department in relation to any issues. But for confidentiality reasons, you shouldn't be sharing the details of the people involved in any type of concern. That should only be with the safeguarding department. And again, that comes down to confidentiality and who really needs to know about that information. Then we go on to assessing and managing risk. And I should say there, we experienced some technical difficulties actually at the start. When we were starting off the presentation, there's an issue with questions. It's difficult to, or it's switched off and we couldn't get it on. There was some issue with it. So if you have questions, please email them to safeguarding@scouts.ie. A lot of people asked about asking questions as well during the presentation. And that's an issue for us because I don't know how many have logged in yet. I'll find out after. But in the last 2 webinars, 190 people logged in for the first one and 284 logged in for the second one. And it's just not possible to have a question and answer session live with that. It's just too many people. So that's the reason for us not being able to do questions and answers throughout the webinar. So just going back to assessing and managing risk. So you complete we have a child safeguarding statement that's generic for all the groups. It's on the website. There's one for the Republic of Ireland, one for Northern Ireland. You can download that. You can actually fill in the name of your group in it and then print it out into A3 or A4 and put it up in the Scout Hall, or have it with you if you're in a place that Scouting doesn't actually own. So part of that is identifying potential risks. There is a sample risk assessment template there on the website. We're updating it at the moment to make it fresher, and we'll be making that available very soon. We've been working on that for the last while there, so it's nearly ready to go. And as I mentioned in the last webinar, I think a new webinar that I'm going to do in Q2 is on conducting the risk assessment, specifically the safeguarding risk assessment, and how to do that. Is actually quite simple. It's just a matter of asking the questions and making sure you have the answers to the questions that arise in relation to risks to children. And we'll do a webinar on that to help people with that. So there also needs to be a regular review of the adequacy of the procedures, and we do that at the safeguarding department. But if you think there's an issue with the procedures that you think needs to be changed or causes difficulty, or you see something new that needs to be done, please get on to safeguarding@scouts.ie and let us know about it. Or feel free to ring into the office if you have any opinions in relation to that. They'd be very welcome. So the group risk assessments are done then within the group rather than Scouting Ireland doing one for all groups. You can't really have just a generic risk assessment because there may be some different issues in each group that have to be considered. So the code of behaviour when it comes to responding to and reporting concerns, sorry, not the code of behaviour, the child safeguarding and child protection policy and procedures deals with this. So there's two types of report, which sounds very complicated, but really is quite simple. So if you have a concern, contact the safeguarding department. It's not necessary to have proof of anything that happened. You just have to have a concern. For any abuse or child welfare cases, it doesn't matter whether it's something that happened within scouting or you're concerned about a child because of something you might be thinking you might think is happening outside of scouting. Contact the safeguarding department and we can get the ball rolling for you. And again, if there is that immediate risk, if you're afraid to let one of the children go home from a meeting because you're afraid of serious abuse that might happen in the home, obviously we're not here 24 hours, but you contact the Gardaí or the PSNI. They both have a similar role and similar powers in relation to what they can do with children if there is that really immediate risk where children can't be allowed to go home. So yeah, that's important to do that. So mandated persons is it's to do with the Children First Act 2015, where certain persons such as DLPs and deputy DLPs who work for an organisation or employed by an organisation or the CEO are legally required to notify TUSLA about certain forms of child abuse. And it's most types. There's some that aren't quite covered by the definition, but you could have a reasonable ground for concern and still report it. It doesn't mean you don't report it. So there's this statutory responsibility report, and there's a threshold of harm. So to give you an example, a parent could slap a child on the arm once or on the back of the hand once, and that's considered child abuse. It's an assault. There's no protection for parents anymore, no defence of sorry, I'm after forgetting the word, the defence of reasonable chastisement anymore for parents, so it's an assault. So, but it's a reasonable grounds for concern because the threshold of harm requires that it needs to be something that would seriously harm the welfare or health of a child. And maybe some people feel that would seriously harm the welfare of a child, but it's different to a parent actually beating up a child and causing serious injury to a child. So there's some things that may not be reportable with mandated persons where you don't have to report, but Scouting Ireland is going to report them anyway. When it comes to children outside of Scouting Ireland, I saw that in the questions as well. Why do you need to report to the Safeguarding Department? We can make a proper report to TUSLA and the Garda Síochána. It's also important for us to hold that information securely. We have specific fireproof safes in the office where we store all that information securely. You can, of course, report to TUSLA and the Gardaí yourself if you want, but you need to tell us, and it's the policy of Scouting Ireland that Scouters tell the Safeguarding Department about any child welfare concern, whether they've reported it to the Gardaí or TUSLA or not. So it's important that you tell us. What usually happens once a report goes to the Gardaí and TUSLA is they come back to the Safeguarding Department with their inquiries in relation to the incident, rather than to the specific person. And we'll need to have that information available about the report that went in the first place. So it's really important that it comes through the Safeguarding Department, or at least that you tell us that you've reported it to the Gardaí and or TUSLA or to the PSNI and Gateway Services in Northern Ireland. So the role of the Safeguarding Department then. We take the reports from Scouting Ireland personnel, and where it's deemed appropriate, we refer to the statutory authorities. And very usually we do. We do get some cases that aren't quite child abuse. Someone might refer a bullying case to us between children that doesn't require reporting to the Gardaí or TUSLA, and it goes back to the group to try and sort out and so on. But what we do is advise the reporter in writing if we're not referring, the reasons why we're not referring, and let them know that they can feel free to go to the Gardaí and TUSLA themselves, but to let us know again if they do that. Myself and the 2 case officers, as I said, are the mandated persons in relation to the Children First Act. We advise parents and guardians as appropriate when we get reports to let them know that we've had a report, and we let them know what we're going to do with the case, and we have ongoing support then for them, for the children. We have a continued liaison then with the statutory authorities. We seek updates every so often. Sometimes that can be difficult. Some Gardaí, some social workers aren't sure whether they can share information with us. So we look for very basic updates really about where the case is at. Is it still being investigated? Has it gone to prosecution or conviction and so on? And we usually get that, and we liaise through a central office in Harcourt Square in the Garda National Protective Services Bureau where we have any difficulties in that regard. As I mentioned, we manage all information securely. It's kept in fireproof safes that are locked when we're not in the office. There's a separate room in our office that the safes are in. You can only get in there with electronic fob entry, and the safeguarding staff and 1 centre manager are the only people really who have access to that room. Even the safeguarding office itself requires fob access. Nobody can come into the room without the permission of safeguarding staff. So that's how we manage all of our information securely. Any information that we secure electronically, we have on a secure server that nobody but safeguarding staff have access to. So it's up to the safeguarding department to decide who needs to know. And very often the group leader is the person who needs to know, because they might need to know what's going on for a particular child. They definitely need to know if we have to suspend someone in the group because of a suspicion of child abuse. Thankfully, we don't really have too much of that now. Most of our work really in that regard is done with historical cases. So when it comes to the concerns, we don't investigate them. We pass them on to the statutory authorities, either the Garda or PSNI, or Gateway Services in Northern Ireland, or TUSLA in the Republic of Ireland, and they conduct their investigations. When they're finished, we conduct a risk assessment, and I'll just talk about that again in a second. So any discipline or disputes that might come out of reports to us may go to DRAP. If there's safeguarding issues, they go to the police and social services in whatever jurisdiction they're in. So when it comes to disclosures regarding Scouting Ireland personnel, what happens is I make a report to the CEO and to the manager for volunteer resource manager and group support manager. So safeguarding then, myself and the case officers, we would deal with the complainant, and the manager for victim resource management and group support would deal with the respondent or the person about whom the complaint is made. So in my report, I consider the reasons for whether or not someone should be suspended without prejudice, and that suspension is really based on safeguarding grounds and whether or not we have to consider the risk to children or other vulnerable adults or adults at risk of abuse in Scouting Ireland, and that's really the basis that that decision is made on. And I make my recommendations to the CEO, and then the manager for victim resource management and group support takes over in relation to that and deals with the respondent in that regard. So when the police and social services are finished with their investigations or assessments, or when we find out that they're finished, it's time to consider whether or not the member is allowed to return to Scouting activities. So we conduct a risk assessment following suspension without prejudice. And there's a certain few processes within that. We look at the file, obviously, and see what information is in it. We look to the person who's suspended to get their permission to talk to the police and the social services about their case. You will be re-vetted if you have been suspended, but that does only take maximum a week at this stage unless there are issues in the vetting. The member will be invited to make a written submission, or may be invited to make a written submission, or we may ask the member to take part in a risk assessment interview if it's something that's a bit more complex and something that requires clarity. I suppose something that isn't on the slide there that's important is that there is support for a member who is suspended or who is under investigation by the statutory authorities in relation to a complaint. There is, and the manager for volunteer resource management and group support deals with that, and there's counselling support and so on, and there's an independent link person that can be appointed that the person who is suspended or being investigated can have a say in who that person is. They can nominate that person. So I've gone through that very quickly, and I'm conscious now that we have a problem with the questions that people can't ask questions. Just a few things that have come up in questions otherwise. There have been a couple of questions about people who identify as LGBT, and we are actually working on that at the moment, so we're not forgetting about it, we're not ignoring it. We're actually working with a couple of organisations, and there is an equality and inclusion project team set up to develop policy in relation to that and to other issues to do with equality and inclusion. So that's something that's being worked on at the moment, but I'll be getting back to you soon. Hopefully I'll have an answer to that for the next webinar. I've answered some of the people who've emailed us in the meantime. There is also a document on Scouting Ireland website to do with inclusion, and there's one specifically for people who identify as transgender and the supports that need to be given to those people when they are involved in scouting, whether it's the young people or the volunteers, adult volunteers. There was a question about vetting and getting 3-year reminders. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the mail recently in relation to a new database system that's being considered at the moment, and within that actually is 3-year reminders. In fact, I think they go out 6 months before the 3 years is up in relation to that, and then within 3 months and so on. So there's a reminder system built into the vetting in that new database system. What's really important when it comes to training, this is only really a webinar to advise people of what's in the new documents and so on. People still need to get their safeguarding refresher training. It is up and running again. I believe the pathway training is starting again as well. And you need to get onto your provincial training coordinator in relation to that to try and access courses, because that is something that's going on at the moment. They are being done online for now because of the COVID restrictions, but there are courses out there for training, refresher training in relation to safeguarding. That's really it. I'm sorry about the questioning thing there. We had a difficulty with it, but please email your questions in to safeguarding@scouts.ie and we'll deal with them for you. In addition to that, I'm happy to go and talk to counties or province teams in relation to safeguarding. There'll be smaller groups. I'll be able to have discussions with people. There's already a couple of provinces and counties who've requested that, so I'll be doing that over the next couple of months. But please feel free to request that for provinces and counties. If you want to have a Zoom meeting with me and we can have discussions about different issues, I'm happy to do that to help people out. Okay, so thanks very much for that. Jill was going to be dealing with questions, but there's none coming in. So thanks for listening. The next webinar is Thursday, the 4th of March at 7 p.m. and that's to do with safeguarding adults at risk, that new policy that's come out. I'll be talking about that, and I suppose that's really about being aware of adults at risk who are in scouting. We need to look after them and make sure they're not excluded, that they're included in the work that we do and well protected while we're doing that. Okay, thank you very much.